continuing to track Jesus' campaign to establish the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven, as recorded in the Gospel of Luke. His main opposition, besides Satan and his demons, were the religious establishment. Jesus and his followers were just having too much fun. So the devout party poopers said to Jesus, "John the Baptist's disciples often fasted and prayed, and so do ours. But yours go on eating and drinking." Luke 5:34. John's main source of protein, you may recall from last week, was grasshoppers. So who wouldn't fast and pray for a different diet? Jesus answered his objectors, "Can you make the friends of the bridegroom fast while he is with them?" Jesus used parables to get through to his hard and fast church lady party poopers, to try to help them understand what his mission was and what the kingdom of God is. A parable is a brief story that illuminates a moral or religious theme. Parables don't tell you what to believe, but they make you think about what you do believe. Luke 5:37. "No one pours new wine into an old, hardened wineskin. Otherwise, the new wine will ferment and expand and burst the skin. The wine will run out, and the wineskin will be ruined. No new wine must be poured into new and malleable, flexible wineskins." Now, I have not forgotten that it is Mother's Day. Prenatal researchers have demonstrated that babies start to learn in their third trimester of pregnancy and possibly earlier. Babies in vitro, or in how to say it? In utero, thank you. That's another thing that is vitro. In utero, hears his mother's voice. And around the 7th or 8th month, the fetus heart literally slows down slightly whenever the mother is speaking, indicating that mom's voice has a calming effect. One study, the researchers put pacifiers into one-day-old babies' mouths. And the pacifier was connected to a recording of the mother's voice and another woman who was unfamiliar. And within 10 minutes, the baby learned how to suck in such a way that he would hear his mother's recorded voice. Unfortunately, there is no evidence that the newborns show similar preferences for their father's voice. Dads, we have a less nurturing and more authoritative voice, which comes into play later on in the child's life, which is why we probably don't make such a big deal out of Father's Day. Researchers using the same pacifier technique also demonstrated that the child would suck more vigorously if he was listening to people speaking in the mother's language, giving new meaning to mother tongue. The child in the womb also learns to have a preference for what the mother likes to eat and likes to smell. So compelling is this research about the dance between the mother and the baby while she or he is in the womb, that researchers now urge hospitals not to wash and weigh the baby immediately after birth, but rather to place it between the mother's breasts for at least an hour before they go on with their other procedures.
Can you unmute your microphone?
Unmute my microphone.
Please.
How's that?
That's better.
Better.
Better. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's nice that you want to hear me. Most of us just like to tune me out. We're going to talk about that in a second. Neuroscientists tell us that the baby in the trimester has developed, in his third trimester, has developed over 1 billion neurons or brain cells. That's all that they will ever need. Unfortunately, that's all we also ever get. For those of us who have wasted a few of those on drugs and alcohol and other mindless things, too bad. But the good news is this. We cannot grow new neurons, but we can grow what they refer to as dendrites, which are the connections between neurons. And each neuron can have as much as 10,000 different dendrite connections. And when a new problem presents itself, or a challenge presents itself, immediately the brain starts to process this problem, and the neurons start firing through the dendrites, and they first go to all the dendrites that they're already connected to. But if those connections cannot solve the new problem, then the brain starts to grow and send out new dendrites to connect with new neurons so that they can somehow come up with a new solution to the problem. That's what biologists, neuroscientists call learning. Alternately, if we're in a non-challenging, stable situation, staring at the TV 8 hours a day, for example, the neurons literally start to recede. They literally start to go back, to die out, because they haven't received enough stimulation to keep them growing. Marilyn Diamond, a brain researcher at UC Berkeley, once told me that she would not take a vacation longer than 4 days, because she had figured out after 4 days, that's when the dendrites start dying off. Yesterday, Joe's friend Jen, after we were coming back from a walk, pointed to a plant in my backyard and said, "Oh, that's a pretty plant. What is it?" And immediately, my brain went to work on trying to impress her with my great knowledge of all these things. And yet, I couldn't come up with it. And I thought, oh my God, my dendrites are dying. So I worked and worked and worked on this problem, and finally, after at least a half an hour, much too late to impress Jen, I came up with bougainvillea. With problems we have solved over and over and over again, the dendrite pathways become superhighways. The neuroscientists refer to it as being hardwired. Once a very difficult task becomes easier and easier and easier as this connection becomes stronger and stronger and stronger, until finally we don't even really have to think about some things. All us wards consider ourselves teachers. My sister Bridget recently had a granddaughter. She's now a year and a half old. And so my sister feels compelled that it's her responsibility to teach her granddaughter, Alberta, named after my mother. We were all thrilled by that. Teach Alberta her different body parts. So she would do something like this. She would point and say, elbow! And Alberta, who was a genius like all the rest of the ward, would respond with something like, ah, yeah. And Bridget would point again and say, elbow! And Alberta would, okay, elbow. Elbow! And so it goes until finally this little genius comes up with elbow. Oh my God, this guy was smart. So it is that developmental psychologists tell us that we develop language. Oddly, or unfortunately, by the time we reach the age of 4, the pathways for our language learning are so hardwired that when we are asked to learn elbow in another language, what is elbow in Spanish? Huh? Huh? What is that funny word? It's an elbow. Don't you know it's an elbow? The problem is, once the dendrite pathways are hardwired or superhighways, in one language, it's very, very hard to learn another. Last Saturday, I went to a meeting to listen to the PAN, the P-A-N, candidate for mayor in Rosarito, who gave, I guess, a rousing speech of some sort or another. I heard every word, but I didn't understand a word. Well, now and again, she would say something that vaguely resembles English, and it's like, oh yeah, I got that. I flunked Spanish because Hola Isabel, como está? Was just too much for my hardwired English dendrites to connect. Now, our hardwired circuits are what Jesus refers to as our old, inflexible wineskins. The Pharisees, and for that matter, his 12 disciples, all had a hardwired wineskin that expected a Christ, and Christ is not Jesus' last name. It's actually it talks about a state or a particular situation. It's a Messiah. It's supposed to, in their minds, in the minds of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the teachers of the law and all the disciples, this was, the Messiah was supposed to be, as they read the Old Testament in their or their zero-sum world, which we explained last week, as they read it, was supposed to be a warrior king, like David. Not a prince of peace in the person of a poor, uneducated carpenter who in those days were not considered to be, highly admired and respected union people. No, these were lowly laborers from the sticks, way up north of Israel, nowhere close to Jerusalem. How could such a guy kick out the Romans, the oppressors, with a campaign of forgiveness and orders like turn the other cheek? Are you kidding? Love your enemy? Come on, get real. So it is, when we're hardwired for one particular understanding of what something should be, as the Pharisees and Jesus' disciples were, they were expecting somebody to come and kick the Romans out. When something different, very different, comes along, the Prince of Peace, it's, if not incomprehensible, it's counterintuitive. It doesn't make any sense. How in the world is this Messiah going to set Israel up as a great nation with his forgiveness platform and this turn the other cheek craziness? Doesn't make any sense. It threatened to blow their minds literally. All these connections that were hardwired in had to somehow be blown up so that they could accept new wine. Matthew 13:13. Though seeing, they do not see. Though hearing, they do not hear or understand. Well, you might ask, as we sang here today, God is our wonderful creator. He made us and and we're made to worship Him. So why wouldn't it be like with our mother, since God is our nurturer and our caregiver and our life giver, why wouldn't we be wired to hear His word? Why wouldn't we, as His little lambs, want to follow Him? Well, it's interesting how quickly children learn to ignore and distort their mother's voice. Mom says, "Eat your peas." And the next thing, peas are randomly dropping across the kitchen floor like barrel bombs. When the child reaches adolescence, he is almost deaf. Their hearing loss is such a challenge to Mom. Mom has to develop new strategies. She has to get her dendrites moving and find ways to somehow get the child to obey her directions. So, she uses Dad as an amplifier. "Your father will be home any minute. You better mow the lawn, or he's going to give you a mohawk." But when the child reaches his teenage years with his iPhone and earbuds, he becomes completely deaf. And again, Mother has to expand her parameters, find new ways, new connections to somehow get the child to do what he literally needs to do for his health and well-being. So, after a candlelit dinner where Mom serves in a dress which would be too racy for church, she says to her husband, "We," which means you or him, "have to do something about our," which means his, "son to quit smoking, do his homework, be home by 10, I don't know, you fill in the blanks. He doesn't listen to me anymore." Meanwhile, the man, who is hardwired to understand that if he doesn't respond in some positive way to his wife, who's in this dress too racy for church, he won't get a kiss. He not only won't get a kiss, he'll get kissed off and have to spend the night in the doghouse. So of course, he's going to go out there and lay the law down to that little rebellious punk. Jesus concludes his parable this way. "No one, after drinking old wine, wants the new. For they say the old is better." The question that you have to ask is the old wine really better? It tastes good, like your mother's cooking. Let's say your mother was a terrible cook. She burned everything. And you marry a woman who's been to the Cordon Bleu cooking school in Paris. And she prepares for you this gorgeous medium rare steak done just to perfection. Ooh, like mine burnt. That's the way my mother did it. That's what I'm used to. He may choke it down to get a kiss, but he won't like it. Your hardwire is like the old wineskin. Unfortunately, in the case of the Pharisees and Jesus' disciples, their traditional religious dendrite pathways made it hard for them to hear Jesus' new wine, or to receive this new wine of forgiveness and sacrifice. Jesus tells his disciples in the 16th chapter of Matthew that he is going to have to die, suffer and die to establish this magnificent kingdom of God full of all kinds of love and peace and goodness. And his disciples, who were hardwired to expect a warrior king, thought he was at some point going to gather an army and kick the Romans out. They didn't get it. His main disciple, Peter, says this. He took him aside, that's Jesus, and began to rebuke Jesus. Wait a minute, Jesus, you got this wrong. Your connections are all scrambled. That's not the way the world works. Far be it from you, Lord, he said. This shall never happen to you. Verse 23, but Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are hardwired in the upside down and backward way of this world. You are a stumbling stone to me. You do not have a mind with godly connections, but misconceptions of a fallen world. Old wine only tastes good because it's what you're used to. You're hardwired to like it, but it doesn't mean that it's good for you. Most of us, thanks to Prince Hershey and Dairy Queen, are hardwired to love sugar. Can't wait. Ooh, you get all excited. The adrenaline runs, the endorphins flow. Oh, I'm going to have a double dip cone. We're hardwired to like it. That doesn't mean it's good for you. Sugar not only can rot your teeth, but in excess, it can literally kill you. It throws everything in your endocrine system. Is that right, Jim? Endocrine system, no. It's the reason why most people who are obese are obese. Our neurons and dendrites need the right nutrients and lots of them. The brain actually only weighs approximately 3 pounds. But it requires so many nutrients and so much oxygen that 20% of the blood that the heart pumps goes to serve the brain. And so it is that if we don't get enough blood or enough blood pressure to the brain, we literally pass out. We become unconscious. During Jesus' Last Supper with his disciples, who were still struggling to understand this idea of forgiving people and somehow turning the other cheek, and this is hard for them to grasp, this loving kingdom stuff. Luke 22:19, he says to these poor, struggling, mentally challenged folks, I take this bread, and I give thanks, and I will break it. And I'm going to give it to you. This is my body. These are the nutrients that your soul and your heart need to grow in the love and the forgiveness and the grace that is required in my kingdom. Then, in the same manner, after supper, he took the cup. Come up, please. He took the cup and said, this is the new covenant. This is the new solution. This is the solution mankind needs. Not just to get a free ticket to heaven. Not just to get inside the gates. We got to think about what's going to happen once we get into those gates. Are you ready? Do you have the new wine in enough quantity to survive the new kingdom of God? So it's not just about getting into God's kingdom, but once we get there, are you going to be happy serving? Are you going to have the loving obedience that Jesus himself modeled for us when he got up on the cross in obedience to his Father? Are you ready for that? Probably not. We Christians have a lot to learn. So, this morning, let us pour out the old, angry, jealous, rebellious wine. The sweet, sugary syrup that's going to kill us. And let us lift our cups up to the new wine that may seem incongruous as we work through our day-to-day lives, but the new wine that's going to bring new life and new joy and new grace into our hearts. As the Prince of Peace pours out his blood so that we can make the connections we need to have the faith, the hope, the love required to be happy and everlasting